Hey everyone, I'm going to talk about a paper that we recently published in the Journal of Imaging Informatics in Medicine. In this study, we explored whether we could use generative AI to enhance wrist radiographs that are affected by cast shadow artifacts. So, Mohammed and Daniel got interested in this problem before my time at Monash, and at that time, only one study had been published on this topic. Then Daniel trained some AI models to tackle these artifacts. And when I started working at Monash, I joined in this project and we got 3 radiologists to report on some of the AI generated images. Then we analyzed the results and wrote a paper about the study. So let's go through an example patient journey. Let's say someone's riding their bike, trying to do cool tricks to impress their friends. And then they fall on an outstretched hand, or foosh. The patient then presents to the emergency department with pain, swelling, and decreased range of motion in the injured wrist. This person is then examined by the clinical team for deformity, tenderness, and so on. And then X-ray imaging is performed to determine the type, location, and severity of the fracture. Based on imaging, the radiologist diagnoses the fracture, and in cases where the bone is displaced or unstable, surgical intervention may be indicated. In this example, the clinical indication was given by fallen from push bike and landed onto left forearm, querying fracture of the distal radius or fracture of the shaft of radius and ulna. Now, as you can see in the red bounding boxes, the fracture is quite obvious in this case. The report found that there is a transversely oriented, mildly displaced and dorsally angulated fracture through the distal left radial metaphysis. During the reduction process, the doctor gently realigns the broken bone fragments using traction and manipulation, in some cases checking the alignment with fluoroscopic imaging, and in more complicated cases, open reduction or surgery is needed. After alignment, a molded cast is applied to immobilize the limb, ensuring the fracture heals correctly. Imaging is then used to check that the reduction was done properly. In this case, the imaging request for a reduction check queried for a post-reduction distal radius fracture. The radiology report noted that views through the plaster obscure fine bony detail, something which is typically noted in these reports. So, there is a clinical problem of cast shadow artifacts in wrist radiographs. The report did also note the green stick fracture involving the distal radial diaphysis, though in these images you can see that the fracture is less obvious through the cast. So, with that example case, we furnished some motivation for the clinical problem, which is that damaged limbs often require stabilization using splints and casts made of resin, fiberglass, or plaster. Removing the cast before imaging is impractical during follow-up radiographs that monitor the position or healing of fractures. So the presence of a cast introduces undesirable artifacts that obscure the visualization of bone structure and encompass the examined anatomy. Our solution to this problem was to apply a CycleGAN model to enhance the diagnosis by suppressing cast shadow artifacts in wrist radiographs. Now, CycleGAN is a type of generative adversarial network designed for image-to-image translation tasks without the need for paired training data. It works by learning 2 mappings, one for converting images from domain A to domain B, and another for the reverse, while enforcing cycle consistency so that translating an image to the other domain and back returns the original image. You can see that this problem was initially conceived as one to map images of horses to images of zebras, but could be more broadly applied to image processing problems, such as that of cast suppression. So, first we pulled 30,000 wrist x-rays from packs taken between 2013 and 2023. Then we converted them to 8-bit grayscale PNG files. Then we selected a subset of 11,500 radiographs equally split into cast and no cast, which we then split into training and testing images with a 90-10 split, which were then pre-processed and zero-padded into 512 by 512 pixels. The diagram shown here illustrates how the CycleGAN modeling process works. First, you prepare the unpaired dataset as we've just outlined. Then, the model starts training with generators G and F, which attempt to translate images into the opposite domains. So, F attempts to generate casts onto images, and G attempts to decast images. The discriminators D of X and D of Y essentially make predictions on whether input images are real or generated. So the cycle begins, where the model learns to generate realistic-looking images from one domain to the other, and the discriminators attempt to distinguish between real and generated images. In this way, a well-trained CycleGAN model will learn how to generate high-quality, realistic images that fool the discriminator into thinking they're real. Finally, once training is finished, the model is ready to deploy. At this point, you can apply your generators G and F to decast or even generate fake casts onto images. Some of the less interesting and more technical details about the training process are noted below, including the model being trained to optimize a loss function consisting of adversarial, cycle consistency, and identity loss. The same training parameters as in the first publication were used for consistency with a UNet 512 architecture. But we also developed the CycleGAN model to include a perceptual loss function with the VGG16 network trained on the ImageNet dataset and a self-attention layer. So briefly, the perceptual loss function compares high-level features extracted from a pre-trained network rather than relying solely on pixel differences. It encourages the generated image to be perceptually similar to the target, capturing texture and content more effectively. The self-attention layer computes relationships between all positions in an input feature map, allowing the model to focus on globally relevant features. It enhances representation by capturing long-range dependencies and contextual information. Great, so we've developed and trained a CycleGAN model on Monash Health data. But how do we objectively measure and compare the performance of our models and against others, for example? Now, for the first part of testing model performance, we did a quantitative analysis. Histogram correlation, intersection, chi-squared distance, and Hellinger distance just compare histograms, which is highly limited because spatial information is lost when you convert an image to a histogram. And the SSIM is not really meaningful in this case because we don't have a paired problem, so we don't have paired images to compare. And further, we use different images for training and testing as in the first study, meaning that these results are not really reproducible. And finally, the model combinations are not significantly different from each other in most metrics. So we essentially found that these quantitative metrics are not particularly useful. So for the first part of the qualitative testing of model performance, we gave the 3 radiologists 60 images each, and we asked them to classify the images as either unenhanced or AI enhanced. Now, you can see from the confusion matrix that when radiologists were given unenhanced images, they mostly classified them as that. Whereas when radiologists were given AI-enhanced images, they more often than not classified them as unenhanced. So this test demonstrated that the model generates high-quality images that are usually indistinguishable by radiologists from unenhanced images. In the second part of qualitative testing of model performance, we gave the 3 radiologists 20 cases each, where follow-up imaging was recommended due to cast artifacts, and we asked the radiologist to write diagnostic reports. For each case, the AI-enhanced images were also provided to assist with diagnostic reporting. Now, in most cases, the radiologists found that AI-enhanced images improved their diagnostic confidence. And in most cases, the radiologists wrote reports with the same conclusions as found in the official report on PACS. And in some cases, the report was more decisive about fractures that were suspected in the original reports. And in a small number of cases, a new fracture was identified, which was not noted in the original diagnostic report. So to take that experiment a bit further, where available, which was in 10 cases, the reports from follow-up CT imaging were compared with those produced by radiologists reading the AI-generated images. And every report, except 2, provided identical diagnoses as those associated with the follow-up imaging. In terms of those that differed, one radiologist identified a non-displaced fracture of the proximal pole of the scaphoid bone. And although all 3 radiologists had correctly diagnosed the distal radius fracture confirmed by the follow-up CT scan, the report in that stated that the scaphoid is normal. In the other report with a diagnosis that differed, one radiologist found that linear lucency through the distal radius may represent a non-displaced fracture, although assessment is suboptimal. In this case, the other 2 radiologists wrote no fracture, as was determined in follow-up CT imaging. Now, the ability of radiologists to perform robust reporting with downsampled AI-enhanced images is clinically meaningful and warrants further investigation. Now, shown here is an example so that you can see the original image and the CycleGAN generated decasted version of that image. Shown here is another example of a generated image, but this time with a lateral projection. Shown here are a couple of examples that show you how the different model combinations with or without the perceptual loss function and self-attention layer affects the image outputs. You can also see in these examples how the model fails to produce good outputs where part of the anatomy goes missing, in some cases with very heavy, essentially hallucinations. So, despite many limitations, this study lays the groundwork for developing a pipeline of AI models that can be built and eventually translated to the musculoskeletal radiology clinic. And to our knowledge, this is the first time that radiologists have reported on AI-generated cast shadow suppressed wrist radiographs. This tool has demonstrated the potential for reducing patient doses by avoiding repeat imaging, improving operational efficiency, reducing delays to diagnosis, reducing patient visits, and facilitating radiologist workflows. As usual, please get in touch if you have any questions, and thank you for listening.